Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. So we're going to start with introductions, then we're going to go through what to expect during on-campus interviews and the early interview program. Your school might call it something different, but you might hear terms like OCI, which stands for on-campus interviews, or you might hear EIP, which is the early interview program. We're going to talk about how to research law firms, what websites to go to. Then we're going to get into what to consider when you're bidding. So bidding means you're going to rank the firms that you want to interview with, because it's sort of like a lottery system at some schools. So you don't get to just interview with everyone, you have to rank it. We'll get into best practices for screener interviews, which are the short 15-minute interviews. And then we'll talk about the callback interviews, which can be all day long sometimes, but at the very least, they're 30 minutes with different associates and partners. And then we'll get into tips on what to avoid doing. Those are always good tips to hear. And then we'll do how to follow up after interviews and take questions. So I'll kick it off with the introductions, and then I'll go to Alexi, Aisha, Taylor, and Kat, and then we will jump right in. So as you guys may know, my name is Ashley Larison. I'm the founder of Ivy Grad Services, and I'm on the Pipeline to Practice board. And I'm so glad you guys are here. I went to Columbia undergrad, Columbia Law School, and I currently work at Sullivan & Cromwell as a litigation associate. And I'll turn it over to Alexi.
Yes, hi everyone. Very similarly to Ashley, I went to Columbia undergrad and then Columbia Law School, but I did a JD MBA program, so law school and business school at Columbia as well. I'm currently an associate at Simpson Thacher & Bartlett in the capital markets practice, and yeah, it's really great to be here and really looking forward to presenting to all of you.
Awesome. Aisha?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aisha McHugh. I went to Cornell for undergrad, Columbia for law school, and I currently am an associate in the sports group at Proskauer Rose.
Awesome. Taylor, do you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor Grant. I went to Howard University for undergrad and the University of Maryland Carey School of Law for law school. And currently, I'm a litigation associate for Reed Smith in Washington, D.C. Looking forward to speaking with you all.
Nice. And Kat, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, everyone. My name is Kat. I went to Columbia for undergrad as well and went to Howard for law school. I'm currently in the data privacy group at White & Case here in DC.
Excellent. So now we're going to turn it over to Aisha, and she's going to tell you guys about what to expect during on-campus interviews and the early interview program. And again, feel free to throw any questions in the chat if any come up while we're all talking to you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. So Ashley gave a little preview for this, but in what we call OCI, or the on-campus interviewing, and some schools, you will also see it referred to as EIP, the early interviewing program, or EIW, W just standing for week as opposed to the program. You have what we call screeners. Law firms, law fields, they like to use terms that other people don't really use, and it can feel very jolting. And for those of you like myself who are the first in your families to embark upon this process, this is part of the reason why we're doing this, to make all of this, like, dismantle all the things that make it seem kind of freaky and weird and, you know, odd. The screener interview, like Ashley said, is a really short interview. It's observational, really, and informational. So the length usually varies from 15 to 20 minutes max. And what you'll usually see is it's just one interview in which you're speaking with either a partner or an associate on behalf of, as a representative of a firm. They'll ask you certain questions. They'll give you an opportunity to ask them questions, but it's very, very short. That's when you will consider using that elevator pitch of yourself and the key things that you kind of want to get out there. With regards to researching firms, and that's kind of tied to your approach with OCI or EIP, EIW, you may use certain online resources like Vault or Chambers, Glassdoor, different things that you can Google, even the firm's website. You may use the resources that your schools provide, but I would also emphasize utilizing personal relationships. I know that for myself, planning lunch calls, coffee chats with individuals who were 3Ls at my law school, 2Ls at my law school, who were SEO interns at certain firms, recent graduates of my law school, or even alumni. It was incredibly helpful for me to get into the nitty-gritty and ask questions with people that I felt comfortable asking those kind of hard questions about culture and about the environment, things that you're not going to be able to likely get off of a firm website when they are promoting itself. One caveat that I will mention, and I think is really important for you all to know, is the Vault, the Chambers, those other online resources that you may turn to. Firms are curating the material that goes up on those sites. It is another part of their online presence and representation of themselves. So you can see that as hand in hand or working in tandem with their website. So again, I do emphasize that personal capital and turning to others to understand a bit more about the firm itself. And don't feel timidity in reaching out to the firm's recruiting department as well and seeing who they can connect you with, who are currently working at the firm, as people that you can reach out to and speak to in advance of or even after having interviews at those firms.
That's awesome. I'm going to throw some links into the chat. So as Aisha mentioned, like the firms are putting their best foot forward when they're posting their, company profiles. So these are just some examples. One is from Vault, one is from Chambers. Can you guys see those in the chat? Yeah.
And Ash, one more thing to add before we switch over to the next topic. I just want to emphasize as well for our participants here that you should expect to have a little bit of a longer day. Even if you have only a handful of firms that you're interviewing with, you're going from different interview screener meetings one to another. And even though the time is truncated, it can be a little bit of an energy zap, even for those of you who, like myself, definitely identify as more extroverted on that scale of introvert to extrovert. So whatever you can do to help you stay energized and engaged without becoming jittery is something to keep in mind, because you might have long gaps of time in between your first screener interview and your last screener interview, or you may have a lot of interviews consecutively back to back, where you kind of have to really stay on the ball and make sure that you're not kind of forgetting who you're speaking with, who you're meeting with, and not doing those little things that I'm sure you remember when you were applying to law school, where you weren't sending an application. I'll use Columbia because I went to Columbia, but then you say, I see Taylor, so I'm going to say you say Howard, but you're applying to Columbia or vice versa, right? So making sure you're doing those things to stay on top of your game, knowing who you're speaking with. And even with that, you can feel free to actually recycle questions, right? Firm A won't know that you ask the same questions as Firm B, right? So those are the little things you can do to keep yourself primed and also reduce the margin of error.
Excellent. Those are great tips. And I would also add, so with the screeners, like Aisha said, for example, my personal experience, because I had a 1L firm job, I didn't have a lot of screeners because I was able to have a shorter list of firms that I was interested in. So what we're talking about is when you're after this first 1L summer that you guys are going to have, after that you have you're interviewing for your 2L summer, which is when you get your full-time job. That's the goal of your 2L summer. So if you do get a 1L firm position, if that's something you're interested in, you won't have to have a long list of firms that you want to apply to. So I had, I think, 4 screeners. 2 were back to back in the morning. Then I had a huge gap and 2 were in the afternoon. And so like Aisha said, you can recycle the questions. And what I did to prepare was I talked about myself, because you have 15 minutes. You don't want to go in there trying to impress them about everything you know about their firm, because you want them to remember who you were. So sometimes they'll give you information and say, oh, you're going to meet with Ashley. She's a litigation associate and, she focuses on this and that. They'll give you a link to their bio. I wouldn't spend so much time researching everything you can about that person, but I would talk about what practice group you're interested in if you have a certain interest, or I would mention what you just did for your past 1L summer. I see a question in the chat. It's about when you should start researching firms and organizations during 1L year. My advice to that, and others can chime in, but I say during Thanksgiving break. So that's a lot of times when people are catching up on outlining. So how it was at Columbia in my experience was after Halloween, people weren't like going out and socializing anymore. Halloween was like the last hurrah. And then it was like, all right, get this outlining going. And then people really caught up on outlining during Thanksgiving break. But I spent Thanksgiving break looking at all the firms that accepted 1Ls and looking up like what their programs were, seeing which ones you had to write like diversity fellowship applications for and things like that. So it's never too early, but you really need to be focusing on your classes and readings and your exams. But because you will have a long vacation, a couple extra days, I think Thanksgiving break is a good time, or right now before you start school. But once classes start, I would just focus on like your readings, staying on track and all of that. But I do think Thanksgiving break's a great time to really dive in and say, okay, I don't know, the rules have changed, so you definitely want to meet with career services. But back when I was in law school, you couldn't reach out until December 1st. And I know some of those rules have changed now. But because find out what that date is. It's called NULP, like the national, what does NULP stand for? I'll look it up and put it in the chat. But basically they have certain rules. And so look up what the date that you can start reaching out is. And because I knew it was December 1st, that's when you can send out your cover letters and you can do your outreach and all of that. But if you guys meet people this summer or you research people this summer, add them on LinkedIn and let them know like, hey, I'm starting at, NYU this fall and I'm really interested in IP law. I see that you do that. I'd love to keep in touch. You're not asking for anything. You don't need a coffee chat. You don't need any of their time. Just keep in touch. And then when you can reach out, that's when you can do so.
Yeah, just like a really short addendum on that, and then I guess I'll go into my presentation on I guess strategy during bidding. I remember that in 2018 when I must have been like a 2L / second year in the MBA program at the time, and they actually eliminated the December 1st timing guidelines for recruiting first year students. So basically, it's kind of almost been flipped on its head at this point, where I think things have kind of they've definitely switched a little bit earlier, and that's something that advising like current law students on now has gotten a little bit complicated. Some firms still stick with December 1st, but like where they kind of just open up their actual recruiting process, but it's no longer necessary. So it kind of makes it a little bit like weird in terms of figuring out when to advise students as to like when to actually apply. Because now it's sort of bleeding a little bit earlier actually in terms of competitiveness. Yeah. But
thank you.
yes. No, yes, you're welcome. I'll get the link while I'm talking. But yeah, so that's definitely been a very interesting transition. Because that was always, I think, my advice overall. Just like a really like short I guess thing about like 1L recruiting specifically, because I think especially for all of us as POC, like it's like pretty important to try to get a 1L firm job. Like it's not the end of it's not the end all be all if you do or don't get one, but it can definitely be very helpful. I mean, not only for your resume, but really just like in terms of you getting both a 1L and 2L firm experience, possibly either different firms. In my case, I did 2 different offices of the same firm. So I did the New York office of Simpson Thatcher in my 1L firm experience as a 1L summer, and then as a 2L summer, I went to London. And so I was able to really think about whether I wanted to be in New York or London and go through those recruiting processes or accept like either of those offers once those full-time offers were kind of on the table. So yeah, basically just to kind of switch back over to actual bidding as a 2L. Definitely one thing, and Ashley and I were talking about this previously, but there actually is a good amount of strategy that should go into how you create your bid list, basically. And 3 of the, I think, chief elements of that are geography, practice area, and rankings, right? So what you always want to consider is that it's all of this comes down to numbers, right? It really is about just like when I say competitive, I'm not really talking about prestige. I'm literally just talking about how many people are interviewing with certain firms, and like how many people from like all over the country basically are ending up interviewing with New York and California offices. Because even for me, I had screeners with California firms in both 1L and 2L, and callback interviews for that matter. Even as a person from, you know, a bigger New York law school. So you really do have to think about the fact that, let's say like New York, let's say LA, let's say the Bay Area, San Francisco, those like areas are just going to be really, really, really competitive, just because it's kind of like in terms of how dense those interview seasons are, and in terms of how many people from how many law schools all over the country versus like, let's say, more regional, I think, interview processes, like as may happen in Texas, as may happen in Georgia. You really have to make those considerations when you're creating your bid list. So New York and California, if you're interested in firms in those regions, those generally should be at the top of your bid list. And then from there, like Texas and Georgia would be the next regional band. Then from there, maybe you'd be thinking about even like Chicago. Also, I believe DC is probably in the upper band as well. Like right under, like still very competitive, but like right under New York and California. And so I think that's definitely really important to have in mind. Then you have practice area, like even amongst all of us, you have represented litigation, you have data privacy, you have sports, you have capital markets, and then even within the corporate, then you'll have like the big four corporate, like for instance at Simpson, the way that we have it separated, we're in 4 groups. So finance/credit, capital markets, M&A, and funds. And so those actually, those interview processes are all slightly different actually, and will generally consist of different questions. And even like actually once you're maybe thinking about lateraling to a new firm, like once you're literally an associate, those interviews all look pretty different, right? And that actually starts off in law school, because they really start you off thinking like, you know, what are your top 3 choices? Like they're expecting that, for instance, if you're coming in corporate and doing bidding, even during a screener interview, they might say, what are your top 3 choices since you're corporate? Like, what are you thinking? Are you thinking cap markets, then funds, then credit? They're expecting that you've done your research on the corporate groups. I didn't do any, obviously, I didn't do any litigation interviews. So, but for corporate, I know that they're definitely expecting that you've really done your research on the different groups within corporate, or that you understand, for instance, that, I don't know, for the first 2, different firms do different things with rotations. They're expecting that you understand how their rotation systems work. Or let's say that you're going to be a general corporate associate for the first 1 or 2 years. Or I think at Callback, they do the rotation system right up until you're a partner, actually. So they're expecting that you understand those little details. So again, this is all very strategic. And then at the same time, you really have to think about your preferences and try to keep your preferences in mind. So that means that you're also going to be thinking about, you know, how these firms assign. Do you want a central assignment system, or are you maybe a bigger extrovert who has more confidence in their ability to get those like big sexy assignments on their own, right? Like that's something that like kind of like digging in deeper. I know I'm an introvert and I need a central assignment system. Like I just need you to throw work at me. So I knew I needed to go to a firm with a central assignment system. Specialization, how deeply am I specializing? I didn't actually really want to deeply specialize, even though I knew I wanted to do capital markets pretty early on. And so you have to think, but I also did not want to do like a general corporate rotation or just be a generalist corporate associate either. So you have to be thinking about that in terms of how you're bidding on firms. Then culture, then the culture surrounding pro bono, then, you know, at the end of the day, like prestige, compensation, all of those things, and whether those things are considered competitive for whatever region you're thinking about, are all, I think, important. And then even from the employer's perspective, I think, you know, that's probably one view that you're not even going to get from your Office of Career Services. At the end of the day, firms are really going to be thinking about grades, work, academic history, commercial intelligence, which I think that's one reason why even in law school, where I think a lot of us are tending to try to get more work experience even before law school at this point, so that we are coming in with more what you call commercial intelligence, kind of that ability to really like start off on a running jump basically once you're at a firm. And that's actually kind of getting pretty important to firms too. Engagement, diversity, thinking about like what you're doing while you're on a law school campus or off one, so to speak, right now, maybe.
These are all, not to cut you off, I'm sorry. These are all really great. I don't want to move too far off of Kat, who's going to talk about the screeners, but if you guys were taking notes, Alexi has mentioned so many things. Maybe you can throw some of those in the chat. No, this is great, like things you should be thinking about. If you want to throw some of those in the chat and put down like culture, diversity, practice area, all these things are really important. And those are things you should be thinking about, especially as she mentioned, when you're going into the bidding process. The more research you do before you go into it, the better your situation and the outcome's going to be, because at the end of the day, you can only pick, let's say, 2 firms, because you can split your summer, but at the end of the day, you're only going to work for one law firm, right? So yes, it will be fantastic to have 15 offers, but what are you going to do then? I know people from law school who had 10 offers and they'd want to talk to me about my law firm, and I'm like, you don't even seem like you know where you want to be, what you want to do. They're all over the country and things like that. So definitely take into account all those things that Alexi was saying. I'll turn it over to Kat just quickly so we can stay on track, and then we're going to answer these questions in the chat as well. But Kat's going to talk to us about the best practices for screeners.
Hey everyone. Okay, so screener interviews. Sorry, can you guys hear me? Okay. So screener interviews are honestly your opportunity to stand out. Like, these interviews are so short. The firms are meeting with sometimes maybe like 15 candidates. I know when I did OCIs, I think that each firm had probably about 10 to 15 candidates that they saw each day. So it's really important that you make yourself stand out and you make yourself memorable. So that being said, something that I like to that I used to talk to my mentees about is the scheduling of interviews. So depending on your school, you might have the opportunity to pick which time slots you will interview for. I personally am a morning person, so I prefer to interview in the mornings because I know that I'm going to give my best self in the morning. And I also kind of want to set the bar for the rest of the candidates, right? Like, I want to go in, I'm going to give them this amazing interview, ideally, right? Amazing interview, and then they're like, you know what, we really liked her, and then everybody else, hopefully, they don't do as well, or like they keep comparing them back to like that great interview they had in the morning. That's in my perfect ideal world. However, if it takes you a little bit of time to wake up and you are probably more functioning around noon, schedule those noon interviews. Also keep in mind that around noon, people are hungry, interviewers are tired, so they might be a little cranky and they might want to kind of rush you. Right after lunch, they're probably in a better mood because they've eaten. So these are all kind of little things to think about. Just because you do want to be memorable, you do want to make yourself stand out, and you want to captivate them. You want to keep their attention the entire interview. It's really important. So Aisha mentioned before your elevator pitch, right? So your elevator pitch, it can be whatever it is that you think is going to make you stand out, but whatever it is, you have to perfect it. I would practice it in the mirror. I would just constantly maybe write it out a lot, but just have it. I wouldn't say memorize word for word, but just know what you're gonna say in your pitch, because you don't want to stumble, especially if you're doing 8-10 interviews in one day and you just completely blank out. Just always remember what it is that you want to get across. So if you want to get across to the interviewers that you are tenacious, that you have some grit, or whatever these attributes might be that you want to make sure the interviewers come out knowing about you, just keep that sort of outlined in your head as you're interviewing for these screeners. I personally had mine, I think, just down to the T. I pretty much memorized it, and I was saying almost the same thing, because most of my interviewers asked me please tell me about yourself, and it's so open-ended. It's well, what do you want to know? Do you want to know that I like to cook? What is it that you really want to know here? So what I used to talk about was I always started off by saying why I chose to go to law school. And then I would connect those experiences that led me to want to go to law school with the person that I am today. I would explain how that shaped who I am today, and the character traits and attributes that came along with that, and how those character traits would be helpful in a law firm environment, or how they contribute to a law firm environment, right? So that was my elevator pitch. My elevator pitch was based off of the tell me about yourself question. Now, sometimes I did notice that some interviewers asked more so like behavioral questions. They wanted to see how you act in certain environments. One type of behavioral question that I, from having done interviews myself, actually, that we've used before is like the STAR questions. I don't know if you guys have heard of that before, but it's basically situation, action, result. So tell me about a situation in which you came across a problem. What action did you take? And what was the result? And that could be applied to almost anything. It could be a SAR question about your work environment in a previous position. It could be a SAR question about law school, right? Tell me about a time in which you did not do as well as you wanted, as you hoped on an assignment. What action did you take? What was the result? And so on. So kind of applying that framework. And I think that it even helps to sometimes use that framework for yourself, even if they don't ask it in that format, because it can kind of give the interviewer something to hold on to see like your line of thinking, like, and it's kind of nice if you can say, well, here was the situation, here's the action I took, and here's the result, and they're kind of like, oh, okay, they really thought about this question, they're prepared. Sometimes okay.
No, that's really good. I haven't heard of SAR before, SAR, and I think that's a great way, especially like you guys have to keep in mind, these are 15-minute interviews, right? So if you're a long-winded person, you have to cut yourself off. Like if they ask you one question and you take 10 minutes to answer it, you now have 5 minutes left. And part of that 5 minutes is going to be them asking, do you have any questions for me? Which you all should have. You should have at least 5 questions written down that you ask to everybody. Like, how are assignments given at the firm, or like what, like ask about the summer program perhaps, or ask about mentorship opportunities, ask about their diversity and inclusion, ask about, you know, like have the standard questions that you want to ask. If there's someone who's interviewing you that you actually want to do what they do, then your questions can be a bit more tailored. But the ask, like, do you have any questions for me? It shouldn't be like, do I? It's like, yes, I do. Here they are right here. I'm going to ask them. You know, you don't think about that part of the interview, but like, you can practice this with your friends. Like if you end up forming a study group before an OCI or EIP, you guys can get together. I did it for different, some of my friends before we went through the process, and just getting that elevator pitch down, like Kat said, like, tell me about yourself. That one is going to come up, you know. So Kat mentioned how she answered it. She talked about why she went to law school and what motivated her. For me, I'd say, my name's Ashley. I'm originally from upstate New York, and I went to Columbia undergrad, and I worked for 2 years before I went to law school. This is what I did. This is why I'm interested in this type of law. And realize, like, this is when you need to know your resume. That's why I say for screeners, focus on yourself, because all they're going to do is they're going to have your resume right here, and they're going to say like, oh, what'd you do at this job? Or like, oh, you like to cook. And oh, they're going to just be jumping around your resume. So the screeners, when you know about you don't need to impress them with everything you know about them, because you only have 15 minutes and that's not interesting for anyone. Like if you were interviewing for my firm and you just started telling me everything you know about my firm, when you leave, all I know is stuff I already knew about my firm. You know, like I want to know who you are. And so focus on your resume, implement the SAR method that Kat talked about, and really just try to put your best foot forward and like know everything on your resume so that you can really hit it out of the park. And given that we're still in this semi-COVID's over situation, we don't know whether you guys are going to be doing this virtually. So Taylor's going to give you some tips on virtual interviewing.
Yeah, I think everything that has been said has been great information. And I just want to affirm that all of that still applies in this virtual environment. Like you should still be prepared. You should still do your research on the different types of firms. Why do you want to join that firm? Do research on the person who's interviewing you if you have that information available. What else? I love that Ashley said with the screeners, it's all about you and like really having a solid understanding of what's on your resume, your writing materials, because you do not want to be that person that submits something that's on your resume or a writing sample that you haven't written in like 5 years, and they ask you about it and you're like, oh, I didn't know I had that on my resume. You can't speak about it. I mean, that's kind of embarrassing. So we don't want to do that. But in addition to all of those great things that we've said thus far, I think there's 5 other things that you should be mindful of in this virtual environment. One, I'm going to say be on time. Like, even though you're in the convenience of your home or an office, you should still show up early. To be early is to be on time. To be on time is to be late, and to be late is unacceptable. I have participated in virtual interviews where the person was late and then didn't show up because you got the time zones different. So if you're in DC but you're interviewing for doing a virtual interview in LA, in California, in New York, in Houston, wherever, just be mindful of the time zones. I mean, unfortunately, it kind of left a bad impression on that person, because it's like, if you can't even read the calendar invite, like, what type of attorney are you going to be, you know? So be on time. Also have good lighting and a good background. So don't be in somewhere where it's too dark. Don't be super close to the camera. Like, all these little things are important, and you should just be mindful of that. Don't have any distractions. I think Zoom now has this feature where you can blur your background. Some people like that. I personally find it kind of distracting, because I just think like it's your floating head. So I think if you have like a nice just background, maybe like a bookcase, or I think Zoom has these other virtual backgrounds. It's just like a solid screen or a virtual office. I think those are appropriate. Or even just a white wall in your room or something. I think those are good backgrounds. Good connection. Make sure that you have good internet connection, because you don't want to be talking and you're spotty and then the person's like, I didn't hear you. That can be distracting and frustrating on both parties. So kind of like what Kat said, I highly recommend doing like a mock interview, even though this is virtual. Maybe do with your mentor or someone in the career services offices, where you can make sure that you have a good connection in the room that you're going to have the virtual interview, that the lighting's good, the background's not distracting, all of that. And then 5, I would say, dress to impress. Again, this goes back to the research part. So for instance, if you're interviewing with my firm, Reed Smith, you'll probably find out that even though we're a big law firm, we're a little casual. So you don't necessarily have to wear like the whole full suit, black or navy suit. You can wear like a nice button down, pants, skirt, something, but dress as if you were going to do the interview in person, versus if you're interviewing for someone that's a little bit more professional. They like the suits and tie and all of that, the matching dress. Just do that. I think that's some part of the research that we forget. You just want to dress to impress and just for the job, the position that you're applying for. But other than that, I think what everybody else has said, I don't want to repeat what everyone says. It still applies in this virtual environment. And if you remember those 5 things, I think you will be prepared.
Awesome. I think that's excellent. I hope you guys are taking notes. Those were 5 really great tips. And now we're going to talk about, let's see, Aisha, can you tell us about best practices for callback interviews?
Yeah, I will actually borrow a word that Taylor used that I think is important. And I know that Alexi also mentioned it in the chat, but confidence. I think confidence is really important for you to have when you are showing up for the callback interviews. One important thing for you to remember is you've made it past the first cut. There are a lot of students who have screener interviews, and that's as far as the process goes. I remember interviewing, and the screener interview was as far as I went with some firms, and I got it. It was kind of like, we saw each other. This isn't going any further, and that's okay. But with the callback interview, you know that they're at least interested. They want to have a little bit more time to do a deeper dive. And you, in preparation for that callback interview, should also do a deeper dive. Ashley's really mentioned something that I hope, if you don't remember anything we've said, remember that the screener interview, talk about yourself. Be prepared to respond to the questions that you can expect to come up on your resume, right? I knew that there were certain things on my resume that I just knew. I knew that that could consume the entire interview time. Callback interviews are longer. It's a longer interview process where you're talking about anywhere from a couple of hours to half a day. We've mentioned that within this multimodal world that we're existing in, where some things are virtual and some things are in person, that may look a little bit different. You may not have, a full afternoon of lunch and coffee and those little things that also took up time, but were also part of the interview process. But you should still expect to have at least a couple of hours of interviews. And your interviewers will also range from partners to senior counsels to associates. So when it comes to thinking about how to tailor the questions that you're asking and the way that you're interacting, do keep in mind who you're speaking to, right? Some partners who are very involved with the summer program, for example, they'll be very knowledgeable and they can answer certain questions that you may have about the summer program. Some partners know nothing, and that's no shot to them. They just are not involved, and they're like, that's not my focus. Some associates you may speak to, they lateral to the firm, right? So asking them about the summer may not also be helpful because they did not summer at the firm that you're interviewing at. So those little details are important to kind of keep in mind. One of my favorite kind of go-to questions that I would use, because it was good to keep in my back pocket, and I felt like I was able to do a cleaner comparison across associates and partners, was if you could use one word to describe the culture of your firm, what would it be? And the reason why I would use that question is because I thought that it was a good way to sift through what is more based off of the status of the person who, or the level that they're at of the person who's responding to the question, right? The way that a junior associate will respond is very different from the way a partner will respond to that question. But in any event, if there's any overlap between the way that they're responding, that's giving me a good sign about what's consistent in that firm, in the way that associates and partners are experiencing the firm. But to cap it off, I would say that the most important thing to remember about the callback interview is that it's a two-way interview, right? The screener interview is you kind of getting out of the pool of contestants where it's like, do you make the cut? You made the cut, remember that. But in the same way that you are being interviewed, you are also interviewing. And while firms will try their very best to send their best representatives to interview on their behalf, you may interact with some very interesting characters. If all the characters you interact with are interesting, you have learned something very interesting about the firm. If you too are an interesting character, then maybe you found your fit. If you are not an interesting character, you may say, we may need to part ways. But all those things are things to keep in mind and listen to your gut, right? There are things that you will pick up with that may be separate from what you see when you do their research, when you look at the ranking, but it's important when you're making that decision in the end.
That's fantastic. I think you guys should have picked up on all of that in terms of like you're interviewing because you want them to like you, but you should also like the firm as well, and you want to take notes after you interview. I think that's a good tip as well. If you're going to do 5 callbacks, like you want to make sure that you're taking notes like, okay, what did I like about Skadden? What did I like about Cleary? What did I like about Sullivan and Cromwell? What did I like about Proskauer? Or what didn't I like? Because when you're weighing the pros and cons of each firm, you want to talk to some upperclassmen who may have summered there. You might want to talk to some mentors who might work there, but ultimately you have to make the decision. So you're definitely going to want to have taken some notes so that you remember like how you felt when you were going through the experience. And I'll just say this quickly, like the standard callback in person looks like you're meeting with 2 associates and 2 partners, and let's say 30 minutes with each person. So that's a total of, let's say, 2 hours. And sometimes there would be a lunch in between. So you'd go to the offices, you get to see what it's like to walk through the halls of the office. You get a tour, you get to meet with different, people who work there. So you meet with one associate, another associate, one partner, another partner. And depending on the firm, they're each calling HR or whoever after you leave their office, and they're saying like yay or nay, right? You're getting a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And sometimes, I don't know if any firms do this anymore, but you used to find out at the end of the day whether you got the offer or not, but more often than not, you're going to find out the next day or a couple days later. So I'll go over it in the end, but screeners, you'll find out, everyone finds out at a different time. Some firms will email you that you have a callback, some will call you and leave a voicemail. Some will, some will take 1 day, some will take, 2 weeks, and you have to follow up with them and be like, what's happening here? So they do vary. So don't, like, people get really stressed out because, okay, Aisha might have gotten her callback notification like the same day and I don't get mine for 2 more days. It doesn't really mean all that much, but just know that you could get it in different ways.
Ashley, I think it's important to note before we circle up with Alexi and Kat for the next topic, that a helpful proxy for you all to, our participants to note, is the size of the summer class can be a helpful indication of how quickly or how delayed the timing may be for you to hear back. I know, for example, Cravath generally does offers after callback same day, but they also often do a super day, which is interviewing a lot of people on the same day. They also have a much larger summer class. Firms like Proskauer, using my firm as an example, we have a much smaller summer class where all of our summers across all of our offices is still a fraction of our peer firms. Their summer class just in, like, let's say the New York office, their New York office. And our process is a little bit longer, and that's something that I know they've worked to accelerate. But I do think that it's important to note that the size of the summer class can be a helpful proxy for when you might find out or how quickly you might find out.
Absolutely. And also, perhaps you want to use your 1L summer to decide if you want to be in a smaller class or a larger class. Like, if you want to go to a smaller boutique IP firm and have like 4 or 5 other summer associates, then go try that out and see if that's what you like, or if you want to be in a summer class of 200 people. I think my summer class had like 150, or 180, something crazy. My 1L summer, it was like 75, which felt like more manageable, but like, you go through different experiences and you end up liking different things. So try to get as much variety as you can. Now we're going to turn it over to Alexi and Kat, and you guys can tag team and do some rapid fire, just like what to avoid doing. Just if you each want to give like 5 things to avoid doing, that would be really helpful for everyone.
Can I also add, just real quick, actually, for the long interviews, for the callback interviews, they do, so at least in my firm, we do the 2 partners to associate, but they've also started adding like a first year or a second year at the end of the interviews, to just like somebody that you can talk to just ask like questions about casually. Like, they're not technically interviewing you, but they're there to answer any questions that you have. And I say that because I've actually started doing that this week with the interviewees from Howard. Be careful with that, because although it's a casual conversation, they do still ask me for input at the end. So I know, like, one girl, she was very, very casual, but at the same time, like, you do have to remember that that you're still in an interview mode. So you just have to be careful with that. Yes, just that bit about.
Yeah, so that's a good point. That's something to avoid doing, being too casual. Even if someone went to your alma mater, you might know them socially, anything like that. Like, I also had an experience where someone was just like very informal very quickly. I don't personally mind that, especially if it's a person of color that I think would still do well at the firm. I'm not going to be like, don't hire this person, but you never know who you're talking to, and anyone you interact with from the firm has a say. And just always remember that if you're speaking with someone who's a first year versus a 5th year versus a partner, they can all email and say, I spoke to Ashley, she's very interested in litigation, I think she's great. And they might send 2 sentences off. So you just want it to be really positive like that. You don't want it to be anything where it was just like, oh, that they were a smart person, like something where it's not emphatic and like they're great. So that's something to avoid, but you guys can keep going.
Do you want to go first, Kat, or?
Sure. So I would say just generally avoid being unprepared. Like, it just looks so bad when you say like, oh, I'm really interested in your white collar practice group, and they're like, we do that in our Germany office. So like, I don't know what you're talking about. So definitely like avoid being unprepared.
Yeah, and I'd say for my part, even though a firm may have I'm sure it can be a little bit complicated sometimes, but because what I've also kind of noticed is that some people may get confused a little bit and not realize that even though a firm is very casual, like for instance, like a certain California firm may be really like casual in their business casual, like for interviews, it's still going to be very conservative. Still going to like just like avoid distracting patterns, like things that you could, you know, wear and it'd be no problem because it's business casual, even considered like light business formal. You need to be like very neutral and business formal. That's like business formal. This is like across the country, like for law firm interviews. So don't kind of like get it twisted. Like if you're in Texas or Georgia, you'll know that's conservative already. But like California as well, or even more any of the laxer offices that you're thinking about, still make sure that non-traditional colors, collars, closures on women, like short skirts or like slightly above the knee, that kind of thing. Really, like when you're entering like I don't know, stores, do make sure that you're telling them that you are going to be interviewing for like a conservative, like formal interview. And then another thing here that I because I was really anxious about this as a first generation person from a not you know, from like a less wealthy family. um you should definitely reach out to your, like if you think that or are intimidated by the amount of money that this might cost, or you didn't have like suits before, because I was also KJD, I was straight through, so I didn't have a previous like business formal wardrobe. And it wasn't until after I did interviews that I realized that my law school had a closet for like, they actually had like clothing on hand basically that they were able to kind of like share with us. And honestly, that would have helped me. I'm not even gonna lie. So I'd say if you're a first gen person or a person from like a lower socioeconomic band, and this could be 1L or 2L for that matter, just like reach out and ask them like what your options might be. So avoid not asking for help about things that may be a little bit embarrassing, because you don't want to then end up with like ill-fitting or non-neutral things because maybe like certain things were or were not in your budget.
Also, along those lines of your appearance, also your mannerisms. I'm a type of person where I talk with my hands a lot. I'm constantly using my hands, or I'm fidgeting, especially if my hair is down. Like I'm constantly just like touching it, and so I try to keep I usually will put my hair up in a bun. And that's for me. That's not for like, oh, I don't think that it's professional to have it down. It's just for me. I need to have it away from my face so that I don't touch it, because I will touch my hair, I will touch my earrings. Like I'm always fidgeting. So I would say practice with somebody and have them just sit there and jot down every time that you touch like your hair or your or earrings or whatever it might be. And then eye contact, of course, but just your overall body language is very important. So even if you can't practice with somebody, practice in front of the mirror, just see how you look, facial expressions, try to be a little bit more alive in the interview. I know sometimes it can be really tiring, but just be aware of like what you're coming off as, especially I think in this virtual setting.
Yeah. And just kind of rapid fire, right off that, like the hand talking thing, one thing that I did was record myself, because I don't know, like some of my friends were actually probably too, I think, used to the way I talk with my hands, and so they weren't bringing that up as a criticism. Well, as soon as like the first 2 minutes of me doing a mock interview with myself on video, I was like, oh my God. And so I realized that I like needed to like do certain things. So I do this or like certain like positions where I'm locking my hands, relaxed, comfortably, but like locking my hands in place so I'm not talking with my hands too much on an interview, and I look relaxed and confident but professional.
Those are awesome. I think that's a great tip. Being aware of how you're presenting yourself. You want to speak loudly, especially if one thing I don't like is if someone can't make eye contact or they're like very meek and shy. Like this is your opportunity to say like, here I am. I'm confident. I'm worthy. I'm deserving. I need this money. I need this job. No, but like every interview I went into, I was like, I'm going to get this interview. Like I'm someone who will self-proclaim say I interview very well. And that's probably because I've had a million jobs. And also because like, you know, maybe I haven't gotten every job, but I know I did a good interview, right? So at the end of the day, even if like Aisha said, some screeners, it was just a screener and they sent me on my way, and that's all right. You know, you might feel a certain way after it happens, but you know, I can only work at one law firm, and the law firm that wants me is the law firm that I'm going to because I want that firm as well. That's why doing the research before you bid is really important, because you only want to be bidding for firms that you would actually go to. Like, yes, you want to have some safety firms on there, so to speak, and that might come from law schools will give you a chart and they'll say if your grades are here and if your LSAT is there, like this tends to be where you end up. I wouldn't take that, and run with it. I would glance at it perhaps. I don't even think I looked at that. For me, it's like I knew where I wanted to work, and so I applied to those firms, right? And sometimes if you can't get a firm on your bid list, you can still, like, I had a friend who did his SEO summer at Kirkland and Ellis, and he was there as a 1L, and I wasn't able to get them on my schedule, so I just asked him, and he was able to tell me how to get on the schedule. So just speak up, and if you know people who have connections, sometimes after your 1L summer, firms will tell you like, oh, reach out and we'll give you an interview. You don't have to bid us. We'll still give you a spot. So just know that there are ways to do that. And I see a question, if firms ask about your LSAT, they don't, but I think law schools have like different stats. I just can't remember what the stats were besides your grades, but they tell you like, people tend to have these grades or people tend to have these honors or whatever it is. They're not going to ask you about your LSAT score. And if they did, like, you probably don't want to work there. But that never came up for me. But I'm going to turn it over to Taylor before we get into like the Q&A. And Taylor's going to talk about how to follow up after interviews, like what that looks like and why that's important.
Yeah, that was great. I think it's always funny when we talk about how to dress for an interview because I think it's such a healthy debate depending on who you're talking to. Because I know personally, if you wore a fabulous patterned shirt, I'm going to love it and we're going to talk about it. And you've made a good impression on me, especially if you have substance. So, but hey, not everybody's like me, but I digress. Anyways, following up after interviews, I think this is super important. And a lot of people forget to do it, which I don't understand why, because I think it's proper etiquette and just out of respect, you should follow up with the interviewers to one, thank them for their time. Because once you guys go on the other side, like, I don't know, I can only speak for myself, but interviewing is a lot. It takes up all of your day. And at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're representing yourself well from beginning to end, from screeners, from resume, callback, all the way up to until you get that final decision. And I think following up is the best way to do that. It shows that you really appreciate the person taking the time to meet with you, to get to know you, because they didn't have to. They didn't have to select you, but they did. So I highly recommend following up after the interview. And I will say that people remember those who do follow up and those who do not. And they could hold that against you. And we don't want that one final piece in the puzzle to be something that prevents you from getting the job. So when you follow up, I think there's two ways you can follow up. One, the easiest way is through email, quick and simple. I recommend following up within 24 hours. I think 48 hours is the longest you can go. You don't want them to forget who you are if you wait too long. So in the email, you should follow up and say, thank you for taking the time to interview with me. I think it's important to specifically refer to something that was discussed in that interview. So, like, I appreciate your advice on how the summer program is ran or whatever, but something that can link what you all talked about so they can remember who you are specifically. That's super important. And then, of course, end it with, I look forward to hearing from you soon. If you need any additional information, here's my contact information. Done. And usually, it can, depending on how many interviews you do, it can take maybe 30 minutes, maybe to an hour if you have a lot of interviews, but it's definitely an hour worth spent. And I think the extra cherry on top, in addition to that email, is if you send a handwritten note, I mean, they're going to remember you. Like, no one does that anymore. I think it just makes you look so polished. It, again, on top of the substance that you have, because all of you guys are clearly smart, clearly going to get it all the way through the callback interview. But that little thing with like email thank you note and like a handwritten note just shows like, wow, this person is a class act. And in the handwritten note can cover something very similar. Again, just thanking them for their time, what you guys talked about, and you can be found at X, Y, and Z email and phone converse, email or cell phone, whatever number you want to use. But most important thing is don't not follow back. I think that looks bad on you. It doesn't take long, and it makes a really big difference when you do thank them.
Absolutely. I think that's fantastic and perfect. And I even reached out to people that I knew at the firm who didn't interview me. And that was also one of those like cherry on top moments because, like I knew a partner at my firm, Tracy High is a big name partner at my firm. She's a Black woman and she's very like, in the public eye type of thing. And so I wrote to her. So I mentioned I had 2 screeners in the morning and then a big chunk of time and two screeners in the in the afternoon. And so in between, I went to go do something for Nabalsa. It was like a job fair I was helping out with. In the middle of the day, I dropped, like as I'm going to that, I dropped my cell phone in like Times Square, shattered the case, whatever, shattered the screen. I go to the Apple store, and while I'm there getting my screen fixed, I'm sending emails in the Apple store because you got to be on top of this stuff. So I remember writing like, "Hi, Tracy. I just wanted to reach out and let you know that I had my callbacks today. It went very well. And, I look forward to keeping you posted on how things go, So that was just after a screener. And so you never know, like, how your day is going to go. But I do think writing to people and letting them know, and again, not asking them for anything, right? So you're just saying, I had a great interview today, and adding that special piece that Taylor mentioned, like, thanks so much for sharing more about your white collar practice. I look forward to doing more research on that as well. And I look forward to hearing from you soon. So you don't need to ask them for anything. You don't, you know what I mean? It's, and proofread it a million times. I recently sent a thank you email and I proofread it for probably 30 minutes. And you find stuff because you're so focused that like you're missing the word the, because you're just so hyper focused on everything. You really do need to like proofread it, because the worst situation is that you send a thank you email with like 2 sentences and there's a typo in it. But I would also say, like, when it comes to those callbacks, one last point on that is to make sure that if there is something that you want to address or that someone addresses with you in an interview, that you're prepared to talk about it. So if, God forbid, you don't get straight A's, which is very hard to do your first year of law school, and someone asks you about that, have a response for it, And so if that comes up, just feel comfortable discussing it. That came up in my callback. They said, Ashley, everyone loved you. The only thing we wanted to ask is about this grade or these grades or whatever. And I said, I was prepared to have the conversation. I had my undergrad transcript ready. I had my other transcript, and I had an elevator pitch as to why I was still an amazing candidate without straight A's at these firms that are very grade conscious. So if there is any insecurity that you have, start talking about it either with a friend, with career services, or record yourself, explaining your circumstances, so that if that comes up, that's not like a shot in the foot. That's your opportunity to say, that might be one thing that stands out negatively, but this is why I'm still great. So I think going in with that amount of confidence is going to make you come across like very worthy of a summer associate position. And I know that we're out of time now, but I do want to give a few minutes for those of you who want to stay on for, maybe 5 minutes. If you have any questions or you want to come off mute or throw a question in the chat, we'll give you guys a few minutes to do that.
Ashley, I see that we had a question a little bit earlier from, I think, Lizzie. Is that correct? About, did you all know what type of firm you were interested in working for or practice areas?
Yeah, so for me, I knew what practice area I wanted to go into because I was a paralegal for 2 years in white collar group at a firm. So I was a paralegal at Skadden for 1 year doing white collar work, and then at Wachtell as a general litigation paralegal. So I knew I wanted to do litigation and specifically white collar. I don't know about you guys.
So I knew that I was interested in sports. I also knew that I wanted to do corporate. When I did my summer, I was slightly open to labor. But I will say that law school is a time, even outside of your summers, if you're able to intern, extern, shadow, speak with alums, that definitely is the time to do so. The only reason why I was even briefly considering labor is because I was really fortunate to intern in the labor department of a league for my 2L fall and spring. So with my 1L summer experience and my 2L internships, I was able to go in a little bit more confidently and know that I was interested in corporate. So in the back end, I knew that I was interested in sports, but from the angle of which I wanted to be able to practice sports law, I knew that corporate was the way for me, but that was just based off of prior experiences.
Awesome. And I saw this question here. How do you make the decision between transactional and litigation? I think, like Aisha just said, like that's where you can take different classes in law school. Like you can take corporations and see if you like that. You can take a deals and mergers and acquisitions class and see if you like that. Or you can, take advanced legal writing and take a research course and, be on a journal and do the more litigation focused things and see what you like. If you think you want to go into litigation, then you would want to know that you like to do legal research, you like Westlaw, you like LexisNexis, you want to be on a journal, you want to write a note, all those things. If you think you want to be transactional, then you want to take, like I said, the corporations, you want to take the deal classes, and you might like a more fast-paced environment, but you also want to use your summers, your one-off summer to figure that out as well. And did law school prepare you for the work that you're doing now? And are you always learning something new? I think law school, let's
I like how you all are laughing.
No, it didn't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. All right, let me try to refine that, hone it. Basically, I mean, yes, I took securities regulation. Yes, I took capital markets at the business school. Yes, I took cap markets like courses at the law school, but it doesn't translate really, like working from cases, working in basically essentially what is a pretty heavily transactional practice, from a litigation / case study perspective. It doesn't really translate that well, because that's just not what you're going to be doing day to day. The research and writing, the case studies, like at the end of the day, even those classes which purport to help you understand securities, they're not going to actually be doing the kind of like training and the kind of like helping you think like a transactional attorney that's actually really going to be useful once you started a firm. And I literally realized that like as a 1L and was like, and I still took all the classes I was supposed to, but again, back in 2L, like they didn't help there either, really. And then as an associate, like when I jumped in there, I mean, those first 3 months, like the learning curve is insane. But at the end of the day, that's really it. That's always one of the big things about going to a big law firm, the amount of training that they give you, the thought and the amount of, I think, codification and the kind of like very much ingrained importance of training for these firms. They want all of us to kind of start off and be able to have that running start, right? So they're going to have like week-long or 2-week-long or even 3-week-long, sometimes I've heard, training programs that could be like a pocket MBA, and this is for transactional again. But they're going to have these basically like pocket MBA programs that help you with that kind of commercial intelligence that I was talking about before, really making sure that when you're looking at financial statements or when you're kind of trying to actually understand things on the job, like what's a circle up? I've never seen that before because I'd never heard of a circle up before I got like to actually like on the job, like, and that was like, for the first at least year and a half of my time at Simpson was like one of the main things that I was doing diligence, right? So yes and no. Like it teaches you how to think like a lawyer. These courses are meant to do that, and that's incredibly important. Being able to think like a lawyer, whether you're corporate or whether you're transactional or litigation. But in terms of the actual skills and day to day, no, not really helpful. To be fair.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off of that. Law school definitely teaches you how to read and write and to think critically as a lawyer. But to answer your question, it really doesn't teach you like the ins and out of a law firm. Like it doesn't teach you about corporate politics. It doesn't teach you how to maneuver corporate politics as a person of color in a law firm. Like all of that is through experience, not even the law firm training. Like that's just through experience. It doesn't teach you how to manage these huge caseloads, how to draft an email, like everything that we do and work every day. It's like, I wish I took a course on this in law school. But regardless of that, you're going to learn it through experience and you're going to get it and you're going to do well at it. I have to hop off because I have another meeting to attend, but I just wanted to say that I'm so happy that you guys are participating in this webinar because I think knowing these tips is super important, and the more prepared you are for interviews, the better you're going to do it. Like Ashley said, she's done 1 million interviews, and you probably don't even get nervous for interviews anymore because you just know it. So having these tips and practicing it is so important. But just a reminder that OCI and wherever you work, your 1L or 2L summer is just like one stop in your legal journey. So if you don't get that firm that you thought was your dream firm, do not get discouraged. It's always the next summer. It's always 1 to 2 years. Maybe you'll end up there. I know personally, like there's been obstacles in my life where I thought I wanted to be somewhere at a certain time, but I wasn't prepared. And so it wasn't a denial, but a delay. And then I ended up where I needed to be. And so I just want to like give some encouragement. Like if you guys are just doing your best, going in there with confidence, everything is going to work out in law school and finding your job and your legal career after law school. So good luck with everything. Ashley put Ivy Graph Services contact information in the chat, but if you all want to reach out to me personally, I'll put my email in there as well. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Taylor. Yeah, also like if you end up doing a clerkship, that's a great way to pivot as well. So I did a clerkship immediately after law school. And so then some people go into clerkships without having their law firm job. And many of you on here might not want to go straight to a law firm or to a law firm at all. So this is just what we focus on because we're talking about interviewing specifically for law school. Some of this information may vary if you're interviewing for a public interest position or a fellowship. But at the end of the day, being able to speak about yourself, speak knowledgeably about your resume, to, talk about a legal issue that you encountered and, talk about your past experiences, that's going to translate to any job that you're applying to for the most part. So hopefully you guys got some valuable tips from this. We can be found at Ivy Grad Services. And if you liked this, that's awesome. I don't know what you would do with that information, but thank you so much. You can follow us on Instagram or on social media. And Pipeline to Practice is very happy to have you guys. And we look forward to putting on more programs for you. And if you want to keep in touch, definitely go check out our website, and you can click on our faces on there, and that has our contact information, our LinkedIns. And this is a perfect opportunity to start building your legal network. So not only should you guys be adding each other on LinkedIn, you should be adding us on LinkedIn, and send a little note, say, I attended the